Hello, and welcome to the Romancing in Paris podcast. I'm your host, Lily Heise. In this podcast, we'll be traveling around the city as I pick out my top romantic spots per arrondissement. You don't have to visit these places only as a couple. Exploring them can be the expression of your own love of Paris. Are you ready to get romancing in Paris? For our latest episode of Romancing in Paris, we'll journey to the picturesque 3rd arrondissement. Spread over the upper half of the Marais district, shared with the 4th arrondissement, in recent years the north section of the 3rd, in and around the Rue de Bretagne, has become one of the trendiest neighborhoods of the city, and is home to some perfect romantic bars and restaurants. But we're not going to visit that part of the arrondissement today. Instead, I'm leading you to the south part of the Upper Marais, and to possibly one of my top romantic spots in the whole city, les Archives Nationales. What? Yes, you heard me right, the National Archives. You might be thinking, how can archives be romantic? Well, this is Paris after all. Nothing is impossible, and romance can be hiding in the least expected of places. However, rest assured, we're not going into some dusty archival reading rooms, but there's much more to this very special site. From 1545 to the early 1700s, the Marais became the heart of aristocratic Paris. During this time period, the area's former monasteries, orchards, and farmland were replaced with elegant private mansions, called Hôtel particulier in French, and built for the leading nobles of the country. In the early 1700s, the nobility began gravitating towards new fashionable districts, the Faubourg Saint-Honoré and the Faubourg Saint-Germain. But before they completely abandoned the neighborhood, a few last mansions were built, including one of the district's most opulent, Hôtel de Soubise. In 1700, the Prince and Princess of Soubise bought a sizable property on the corner of Rue des Archives and Rue des Francs Bourgeois. This was not an empty plot of land. As mentioned above, the Marais was already very popular by then. On the property was a semi-fortified manor house, which was called Le Grand Chantier, built in 1375, for Olivier de Clisson. In 1553, it was bought by the Guise or Guise family, other high-level aristocrats, and therefore the home became known as the Hôtel de Guise. After purchasing it, the Guises had Italian artist Francesco Primataccio redecorate part of the interiors. The mansion became one of the most celebrated in the area, and the last Guise who owned it, Marie de Guise, threw fabulous parties here, attended by the who's who in Parisian society. When Marie passed away in 1688, without any direct heirs, the home was eventually put up for sale and purchased by the Soubises, who forked out 326,000 livres for it, the equivalent of a whopping 5.5 million euros. Wow! Where did the Soubises get that kind of money from? Well, here's where the site's first romantic intrigue comes from. The Princess de Soubise, whose name was Anne, was one of the mistresses of King Louis XIV for around 6 years, from 1669 to 1675. Oh la la, Anne, She must have been quite the charmer to have captured the king's favor. It is thought that their affair, and consequently the gifts bestowed upon her by the king, funded the purchase of the Guises' property and the extravagant mansion that was to come. As beautiful as Primatacio's interiors must have been, by this time the Hôtel de Guise was very, very old, and so the Soubises decided, and obviously had the livre to fund it, to give the building a massive overhaul. For this, they hired a young architect, Pierre-Alexis de la Mare. The first thing he decided to do was shift the entrance of the mansion, previously from what is now Rue des Archives, to the Rue Franc-Bourgeois, which was then the main street of the Marais. This is from where you will also enter the site. The oohs and ahs will start as soon as you pass into its marvelous courtyard, featuring a rare oval colonnade. You can almost imagine arriving here by horse and carriage, and the impression one must have had following its curve up to the grand mansion at the other end. Neoclassical in style, the sumptuous residence could really be qualified as a palace. Before you advance down the courtyard, alas, sadly today not by horse and carriage, take a minute to notice the facade. De la Mare hadn't actually torn down all of the medieval manor house. In fact, when standing in the courtyard, look to the far left, and you will see the remains of the former entrance of the Hôtel de Guise in the form of turreted towers. This can also give you an idea of what the Courtis Barbette looked like, which is the subject of the 3rd District episode of my other podcast, Paris Cachet. Be sure to tune into it. We'll be right back with Romancing in Paris after a word from our sponsors.
To flâne is far more than to wander, and bonjour means way more than hello. Discover these and more words that teach us what makes the French so French with Navigating the French, Sundays on Paris Underground Radio.
And now back to Romancing in Paris. On the facade of the Hôtel de Soubise are statues representing the 4 seasons, a common allegory depicted on other mansions of the era, as well as statues representing glory and magnificence, 2 adjectives one could use to describe this building. While you can simply admire it from the exterior, I highly recommend paying the small entrance fee to visit the interiors. Various rooms display prestigious items from the collections of the National Archives. But there's more. Skip past, or skim the displays, of the first room, and you'll enter a whole enchanting world. The majestic former apartments of the prince and princess, which are spread across the back section of the ground and first floors of the building. When the Prince de Soubise died in 1712, the princess had passed away in 1709, the home was inherited by their oldest living son, Hercule. Yes, that's Hercules in French. A few years after Hercule's first wife died in 1727, he decided to get remarried at the age of 63, and to the beautiful and very young Marie-Sophie de Courcillon, who was 19 at the time, she too a widow and on her second marriage. To impress his youthful wife, Hercule embarked on a vast renovation of the interiors of the mansion, hiring architect Germain Buffon to oversee the new designs. The rooms were transformed into the then fashionable Rococo style. Think plenty of glitz, gold, and glamour. I likened the interiors to a mini Versailles. To create this splendid chef-d'œuvre, he enlisted the help of the era's top artists, including François Boucher and Carl Van Loo, whose works also hang at the Louvre. They created a number of beautiful allegorical paintings, many of which feature lovers from Roman mythology, which add additional romantic allure to your visit. You can admire these, as well as intricately carved wood panels, stucco work on the walls and ceilings, sparkling crystal chandeliers, and soaring mirrors as you tour both levels of the elegant rooms. You can easily envision what it must have been like in its heyday. The design and romance reach a pinnacle upstairs in the princess's salon, decorated with the epic legend of Cupid and Psyche, one of the greatest love stories of Roman mythology. The romantic experience is heightened by the fact that the site is little visited, and so you'll have the place virtually to yourselves. Though resist the temptation to hop into the princess's ceremonial bed, which wasn't for sleeping anyway. Like many other aristocratic properties, after the First French Revolution, the building was confiscated by the state. It was Napoleon I who later converted it into the National Archives in 1808, and the grand new staircase and additional archival buildings behind were added under Napoleon III in the mid-1800s. But our visit doesn't end once you descend the building's regal stairs. After you've visited the interior, or if you decided to skip them, in the northeastern corner of the courtyard is an immense doorway. This will take you into a series of hidden gardens, the former gardens of the Hôtel de Soubise and its neighboring private mansions which flank the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois. These charming green spaces, with cozy alcoves, pergolas, and romantic benches, seem to have been designed with lovers in mind. Although currently closed for renovations, the last of these gardens was that of the Cardinal de Strasbourg, the younger son of the Soubises, whose own separate home was built on the other side of the property. Or perhaps he wasn't actually a Soubise, but instead the son of Anne and Louis XIV. He was born during the time of their affair. I'll leave you to contemplate this and the other romantic intrigues of the royals and aristocrats as you visit these gardens. Once the renovations are complete, you may also be able to take the exit on the far end of this garden, which leads you into the Rue des Quatre Fils, from where you can conveniently continue your explorations of the Upper Marais, or drift towards the Rue de Bretagne for a drink or meal in one of those romantic bars and restaurants I alluded to at the beginning. Thank you for listening to this latest edition of Romancing in Paris. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. That way you won't miss the next one. Ratings or reviews are also very appreciated. If you would like to discover more romantic places in the 3rd District, see my website jetammeneither.com for my ultimate guides to the top romantic spots per arrondissement. This podcast was produced by Paris Underground Radio. Check out their website if you're interested in listening to more great podcasts on Paris, including my other podcast, Paris Cachet, which explores even more lesser-known and hidden places in the city.